author and Gullah storyteller Theresa Hilliard has released her third book entitled Mama Doonk's Gullah Recipes. I talk one-on-one with Theresa for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Theresa Jenkins Hilliard, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, thank you for having me. I was excited to get the invitation.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm bringing you on Quintin's Close-Ups because you are an author and a Gullah storyteller who actually released your third book entitled Mama Doonk's Gullah Recipes, the second edition. This book features 25 plus bonus recipes along with additional anecdotes made for reminiscing and a chuckle.
Yes.
What Gullah recipe allowed you to reminisce while actually giving yourself a chuckle?
Well, those pig feet, the pigs.
Yes.
Yes, those pig's feet. You know, my grandmother had lots and lots of hogs and pigs and everything.
Right.
And one minute they're running around in the yard, and the next minute they're on your plate.
Wow. And I want to get back to that in just a second, but obviously your first book, Mama Doonk's Gullah Recipes, a celebration of Charleston's Gullah Geechee culture and cuisine, that is, was published in October of 2018. What is the biggest difference between October 2018 and now when you think of the Gullah culture and obviously Gullah Geechee?
Well, I think that people are becoming more aware of the Gullah Geechee culture. You know, it's been there all along, but, you know, people weren't really embracing it. And of course, in my era, it was sort of taboo. You know, it was taboo. And now everyone's, you know, embracing it. And people, and the younger people are now interested in knowing about their history and culture. You know, when you talk about Geechee, those were fighting words back in my days when I was a kid. Don't you call me no Geechee, because I ain't no Geechee. But, you know, we were, and now, you know, we're embracing it. We began embracing it earlier, but I think as each year goes by, people are embracing it more and more and more.
How do you, Ms. Hilliard, embrace that history and culture in 2021?
Well, you know, with this pandemic, you can't do a whole lot because you're, you know, inside of the house a lot. But by going out, one of my things that I really enjoy doing is going out to the schools. You know, I would go to the schools all over South Carolina and talk about the Gullah Geechee culture, because that's my culture. That's where I'm from, you know, Edisto Island, in the midst of the Gullah Geechee culture, you know, one of the 5 islands where the Gullah Geechee people reside. So that's my history, that's my culture. So I like going out to the schools and talking to the children, you know, about this culture, and they're fascinated by it, really.
What parts of the Gullah Geechee culture are they actually fascinated by?
They're fascinated by the language. You know, it's a lot of things, but they really are fascinated by the language. You know, when I talk about the Gullah and I tell them, you know, what a wine on the Gullah culture and things like that, you know, oh man, the children to laugh and things like that, you know. But I says, you know, it's really no laughing matter. You know, it's really serious because, you know, I emulate my grandmother, and that's how I can really, you know, embrace the culture, by emulating her and how she spoke and the things that she said, because that was really my first language. Because, you know, back when I was growing up, our parents, they left and went to the big cities. So they left us with our grandparents. You know, they went north and, you know, places like Chicago and New York and, you know, Ohio and Florida and places like that, and even Charleston, and left us in the country with our grandparents. So our grandparents were our guardians, you know. So they, in my case, my grandmother was born in 1896, so her only language was Gullah. So, of course, she taught me what she knew, and that was Gullah.
Gullah.
So, but of course, you know, my mother migrated to Charleston, and she started working, you know, certainly back in those days, either you work in the field or you work in someone's kitchen. So she was, I guess you would say, fortunate in a sense that she worked as a cook in the kitchen, and that took her away from the hard work of being in the field. So being around the whites at such an early age, she gravitated toward that language. So then when she would come to visit on the weekends, of course, she would say, you heard that place at Gullah? Well, you weren't allowed to speak that Gullah. So we learned correct English from our parents and, of course, from our teachers.
Right.
And we were taught that was bad English. People are going to think you're dumb and ignorant and stupid and all of that if you spoke Gullah. So we learned, correct English and left that Gullah way behind.
Wow. When did you see that trend of people moving from really the South to up north?
Well, it's really started, it was like in the early 1900s, the 1920s, the 1930s, and there were many, migrations, the 1920s, the 1930s. My mother and my grandmother children, her 5 children, they migrated in the 1940s.
Wow.
So, yeah, so that, it started, and it was sort of like each 10 years or there in between, they continued to just migrate. I think probably my generation was maybe, I'm in my 70s, so my generation would have been probably the last generation just migrate up north a lot. After that time, they were better opportunities, because of the 60s and the civil rights movement and so forth. So because they had a little better opportunities and they didn't have yet the need to migrate up north like our parents.
Wow. And when most of them came back to visit, what did they bring with them as far as experience?
Oh my goodness. I can tell you I was fortunate because my mother migrated to Charleston, and she worked for a wealthy south of Broad Street family. And I wish I knew who it was, but back then you didn't ask questions.
Right.
Because and she had the opportunity of coming to Edisto every weekend to visit me. And my other aunts and uncles, they migrated to New York and Miami, Florida. So they came, like once a year. And they would tell one of my aunt in particular, who was a cook for Park Avenue family, when she came home, she had the largest suitcase, and she would bring all these beautiful clothing because the wealthy family that she worked for had a daughter that was around my age. So she would bring me all of these beautiful clothing. So I had all these pretty things to wear to school that, most kids didn't have. It was left over, but you couldn't tell because they were so wealthy. They probably wore it once or twice. So I had all of these clothing, and when she would come home, it was like Christmas because she would bring all of these clothing for me and lots of stories, and actually true stories about New York. We would say, tell us about New York. And, she would tell us about walking down Park Avenue and going on the subways and all of those exciting things. So you lived vicariously through her when she came home and brought those experiences about the just tall building, the World Trade Center and the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty, which I couldn't fathom. I didn't know exactly what she was talking about. I learned later, when I finally visited New York.
Right.
But she would tell us about those things, and it didn't register to me at the time. And Broadway and all, and I was like, what is Broadway?
Right.
But she brought, I think the memory of her coming home and telling us all of those things. And my mother, of course, being in Charleston and coming back and she would bring lots and lots of goodies and things for us. And my aunt in New York would make all of these, she would make different dishes for us that we wouldn't, that we would normally eat. And that was depending on the ingredients that she was able to get at the earlier age. And of course, later on, they became more available.
Wow. What are those dishes that you make today?
Well, those dishes, it's like Jello.
Oh,
She
yes.
would make these Jello, wine Jello with nuts in
Oh,
it,
yes.
and squash casseroles and things like that. Those were dishes that were not the traditional dishes for us, because our traditional food, which is in the first and second edition of my book, they they are the possums and the coons and the rabbits and
Right.
things like that,
Right.
because we ate off of the land, back then. And, it was um, field to table long before this trend of
Yes.
today. I mean, if you didn't plant it and grow it yourself, you really didn't eat it,
Right. Right.
unless, you could get some off of the farm when they work on the farms, and, maybe they could bring, you know, two or three tomato or a couple of cucumbers or something like that. But, you really ate off of the land and off of the field, and you had to raise the food that you ate, or you go out in the woods and find them, or, you plant them in the field. And, my mother would bring this big 50 pounds of rice and I don't know, like 25 pounds of grits and flour. That was the things that she brought. And everything else my grandmother had to fend for off the land.
Wow. Okay, Miss Hilliard, what are those things that you go and plant and hunt for today?
Oh my goodness, I don't do any of that today. I I don't plant. Listen, I have a blue thumb. I can't grow one iota.
Mm,
I can't grow a thing, so I don't do any kind of planting at all. I go to the grocery store
yeah.
and get everything that I need for
Yes.
preparing my dishes. But back in the days, of course, that was a different time, and I mean, we were so happy to be able to go to a grocery store
Yes.
and you know see all of these vegetables and foods that you can get that was not available
Yeah.
when I was a kid. I mean, we had a grocery store, but it didn't have much in it.
Mm,
So today, I I don't I don't grow anything at all. I do try to eat a little healthy,
yes.
not totally, but I do try to eat a little bit healthy. But I don't. Unfortunately, I don't grow anything at all.
Oh, no worries. And I know, obviously, as you mentioned, you're born and reared on Edisto Island, and you spent
Yeah,
much of your early life with, as you say, with your grandmother, Susie
yeah.
Jenkins, known to everybody as Mama, and to others as Mama Doonk. What does Edisto Island mean to you?
Oh my goodness, everything. Everything, everything. Those experiences that I had out there with my grandmother were like life changing. I didn't. Once I visited Charleston with my mother when I got to be sort of a big girl and was able to go and visit her and saw how they lived. That was for me. I'm like, this is where I want to be. But I am so grateful for the opportunity to have actually lived on the island, because that's really what shaped those experiences shaped who I am today, really. Because if I hadn't lived out there and experienced all of that, then I don't think that my life would have been as well rounded as it is today. So I mean, it was everything. And when I go back out there today, it's a sense of peace. I mean, it's like this is home. This is where I belong. Although I haven't lived there since I was a teenager, but just to go there and know that I I was a part of that land and all of those plantations and all of those experiences at First Baptist Church, and walking down the rock road and walking down the dirt road and making that trek to go to the school bus. And those experiences are very just are etched. They're just etched in my mind and my soul and just the fiber of my being. And I absolutely love Edisto Island. I love it.
Oh yes, yeah. And you talk about walking down those dirt roads, and I'm here in North Mount Pleasant. It kind of reminds me of what you're talking about as far as describing Edisto Island. So that's just amazing to hear.
Yeah, yeah. It was, you couldn't go to many places then. I mean, because the beach where the park was, and we couldn't go there. You could only go there if you had someone that worked on the beach, and you'd go to pick them up or to take them to work or something. So there were places that you couldn't go that now you can. And I've gone back out there and experienced it. And I thought, it was sad that we were not able to enjoy it then. But, the past is the past, and it's good for memories.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously you are an author and storyteller these days. Who is Theresa Hilliard these days, besides those two, obviously, careers?
Well, Theresa Hilliard is a wife. I have a fantastic husband, Ron Hilliard, and Theresa and Ron have 3 beautiful children, and our 2 daughters and our son, and their husbands and wives are like our children. It's like we have 6 children as opposed to we have 10 of the most fantastic grandchildren that you can, and of course, I'm a doting grandmother, but they are just smart and talented, and I can't even imagine my life without them now.
Right.
We're just, I'm a mother and a grandmother and a wife, and I love being all of that.
Absolutely. And I know many of the recipes in your books were Mama Duke's own, often prepared with the help of Hilliard as a young child. Who was Theresa Hilliard as a young girl in the kitchen?
Well, my grandmother was raising her 4 grandchildren, and she raised us up. People say reared, but I'm not going to say reared. I'm going to say raised.
Yeah.
She raised us up as sisters and brothers, the 4 of us. There were 2 boys and 2 girls. And I was a big girl before I knew that we weren't actual sisters and brothers. I mean, I didn't know. We all had different parents, but it didn't register as a little kid that you have different parents, so you can't be sisters and brothers. But anyway, we grew up that way, and that's how my grandmother taught us. It's like, these are your brothers, and this is your sister, and you all take care of each other, and don't let any harm come to me. And I was the youngest, so I was a little spoiled one.
Yes, indeed.
But I loved following my grandmother around. And I was with her the longest, of course, because the others went away. The boys went away and to the military and so forth. And Yvonne left and she went away. So I was there with her for a long time by myself. So I would, every place that she went, I would hold on to that skirt tail, and as long as I was holding on to it, she knew that I was okay. And if she didn't feel a tug, then she'd look back and she knows something's wrong. Right. But I would help her to prepare meals. I always, while the others wanted to go outside and play or do other things, I wanted to be in there with her, just getting in her business, getting in her way, peeling the shrimps and cracking the crabs and little things that I couldn't do well because I was young. Right. And she would say, "Yeah, you're too little, get off me, baby." But I wouldn't pay any attention. I'd move for a second and I'm right back. Wow. And so I just learned how to do all of those things. I did my share of playing as well, but she made me a little stool, and I would stand on this little stool, and she would, tell me, she would set the stool further away from the stove, and I would, if she would turn her head, I would jump over that stool and scoot it a little closer and a little closer. And the next thing you knew, I was close by watching her. And then something, of course, would pop on me, like, some of the grease from that butt meat. And I would yell, and she says, "Girl, I tell you if you don't come here. I tell you I'm going over there now." So I'd have to scoot back. But I always wanted I was like nosy. I wanted to see what she was doing all the time, what she was cooking, how she was cooking it. Right. So I guess that's how I just got interested in
Right.
all of this stuff by just following her and being around her all the time.
Absolutely. And I know it started out as a scrapbook of recipes for your children. What photos still come to mind today?
Well, when the children finally left and went to college and so forth, and once they um, got out on their own, they would always call and ask me how to prepare certain dishes and so forth. And I had, after my, all of my ancestors, the older ones were gone, I was left with the recipes and the scrapbooks and all of these things. And I says, well, I'm going to just write all of this down so that everybody can have it, and you all won't have to call me. I can just prepare a little sort of a scrapbook with all of the recipes, and I would, share with them the things that we ate, and they would just laugh and says, "What? Some of those things are going in trash and all of that." And I was like, "Yeah, that was all good food back in the days. You didn't have an option of what you ate. You ate whatever was put before you." So they were encouraging me to Mommy says, you're always telling us these stories about stuff. You need to write those things down. And I started writing things down and, those stories and stuff. But I also started putting the scrapbook together because the aunt that lived in New York was the only one that actually wrote things down.
Wow.
Everything was in my head. And the children were like, these things are in your head, but you need to put it down on paper so that we can have it. So I really started doing that for them and getting my aunt's, recipes and I started kind of typing them out. And I thought I was going to just maybe photocopy hers, but then some of them were so tattered or whatever. So I says, well, I'm typing it out. And after I was done, they encouraged me to publish it. And I thought, I don't know how to publish it. I says, well, you all do it. And they're like, Mommy, we're working every day and we have children. So you're retired. You can research it. So my daughter gave me, how to publish a book and so forth. And our younger daughter had published a book of poetry, and she gave some information, and the older daughter gave some information and says, Mommy, just Google it, and you can do it. And they just kept encouraging me, and I finally took it seriously and says, well, let me see whether I can do this. And voila, there it was.
It was. And obviously the book pays homage to your ancestors with the field of table recipes prepared by Mama Doonk, obviously your mother, aunt, and yourself. What were those field of table recipes that you all used?
Well, it was, the okra. My grandmother planted okras every day, and she would plant these things she called field peas.
Yes.
And she plant butter beans. And she would plant corn.
Yes.
She planted potatoes. She planted peanuts, sugar cane, sweet potatoes. I was trying to think, but she planted all of those. It was, even if it was just a row or two of each one of those things, and those were the foods that we ate, and we would go to the field, whatever she determined that we were going to eat that day. And we went out in the field and picked the peas or whatever, and you just sit down with the pan. And you would just shell those peas, or, you cut up those okras or whatever it was. You just go to the field and you just get it. And it was in the pot. And of course, she did some canning as well, because that's where you could have food for the winter.
Yes.
So we would have to pick them and peel them and shell them and cut them up and whatever in order to have food for the winter. So she had sort of we call it a pantry, but it was just a little dark place, a dark corner, so to speak, with shelves, and all of the canned food, it was in the jar, was jarring back then.
Right.
And when we would pick all that, anything that was in season, and then we would, she would just jar them and then we would have it for the winter. And she planted watermelon as well.
Oh yes.
So yeah, they were, and then we had lots and lots of fruits too. There were plum trees. I don't know what happened to those things now.
Oh,
But yeah.
I still have some in my house. Well, during the spring season.
Really?
Yeah, the Japanese plums. You pick them off the tree. Yes, ma'am.
Is that so?
Yes,
Oh
ma'am.
my goodness.
Yes.
We had plum trees and pear trees
Oh
and
yes.
fig trees, and they were the bull grapes and the fox grapes and the chickapens and
Right.
the acorns and the pecans, and we had an abundance of things. And now I don't know whatever happened to them, because I go out there for a visit now, and it's just not now, but long before now, and they were all gone. And I thought, we used to have a pecan tree over there, and we had all
Yes.
these plums trees all over here, and I don't know what happened to them, but they're gone.
I know, right there on the east side of Charleston, where I live downtown, there are always Japanese plum trees, sprouting up around the town, particularly during the
Right.
spring season. So it's just amazing to see that. Thank God for those.
Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd like to see that,
Yeah.
because you don't see that, and it seems like you should see that
Right.
still on Ediso Island,
Right.
but you don't. But you don't see much of that anymore. I mean, you had pecans all over the place. We would have, the pear tree would be so loaded, we would take one bite and just throw it away, because there was tons on the vine. And my grandmother, when she would plant those watermelons, we would take it and just drop it on the ground and just
Right.
burst it wide open, and we would grab what we call the heart. You would grab the heart, and then you would eat that heart and throw the rest of the hogs in the pig pen, because you had so much.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lady who has a house there. I want to say right there near Anson Street. She has a plum tree, a pear tree as well. So that's always good to see too.
Wow.
Yes, ma'am.
Man,
Yeah.
I would really love to see that.
Oh yes. And
I
the
would
next
love
thing,
to
I
see.
can get you a bag and I'll give you some.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
listen now, I'm gonna hold you to that.
Yes, ma'am. I'll make that happen. That's easy.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful,
Yes,
wonderful.
ma'am.
I
Yeah.
would definitely appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. You're welcome. You're welcome. And I know, obviously, you talk a lot about your ancestors in this particular interview. If you could write to them right now, what would be that letter?
Well, that letter would be, thank you for the experiences. Although they didn't talk much, they were sort of, my grandmother was like the silent generation, and really my mother as well. Because, I think their experiences were so horrifying that they didn't really talk about it. But then we didn't know enough to ask them about it. For some reason, my generation wasn't curious enough to ask them. But I would say, I wish that I had asked you about your life. I wish that I had the opportunity for you to share with me what your life was like, how you grew up. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your grandmother. I love you, and I am happy to have had those experiences with you, but I wish that you had shared more, and I wish that I had asked more. But thank you. Thank you for the memories.
Yes, indeed. And I know your second book, A Guide to Charleston's African American Historical Markers, published last year, obviously, focuses on African American historical markers that can be found throughout the city of Charleston and some nearby cities. What other cities need African American markers today?
Well, I think that every city in every state, because they should be markers and historical information, because we have been left out of history for most of, for hundreds of years. It was as if we didn't have any history. So I think now that we are focusing on the history and culture of African Americans, that every city, particularly those cities that Africa, those early cities that African Americans played a very, very important role in, those 13 colonies especially, but of course beyond as well. But that we should go back and put those historical markers about our ancestors and what their contributions were. We need to include our history as a part of American history, because America could not be America without the African American experiences. The African Americans built this country. It was their blood, sweat, and tears that built it. Yet, how many monuments do you see about our blood, sweat, and tears? Not many. So I think that all cities, I just can't name them all because I don't know them all, but I think that all of them should really have something or some information about how that city came about and the contributions of our enslaved ancestors, because it was all their blood, sweat, and tears, and they never got one red penny for all of their work.
And I know that Charlestonians and tourists can use your book as an educational guide to the Gullah Geechee culture and Black history. What is the state of Gullah Geechee culture and Black history?
Well, Black history is, like I said, it is American history. And I think now more than ever, we are being included little by little. I don't think that it's transitioning fast enough. I think that it should go a little faster. But we have, commissions and so forth that is bringing this type of information to light, so that people can go to a specific place and find out about our history, our culture, our heritage. And I think that that's very, very important. And I'm really happy when I find out about, maybe a newly developed commission, or, now we're getting the International African American Museum and places like that that's going to tell our story in its totality, not leaving anything out. And I think that that's important, because sometimes people tend to water it down a little bit, so that it doesn't sound so bad. But it's not about sounding bad. We just want the true history to be told. And it is what it is. I mean, we can't say that, so-and-so, was killed or died or whatever the case is. I mean, tell it like it is. So-and-so, was murdered by somebody, or, killed by somebody, or, or whatever. We need to really just tell the true history. And lots of times it's not pretty, and there's not a pretty way to tell it. You just have to tell it, the way that it really, really was.
And how much, Theresa, do you want your story to be told in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh my goodness. My story, well, I think my story should be about preservation, I think, about preserving and appreciating the history and the culture of my Gullah Geechee people, embracing my history growing up on Edisto Island with the outhouse and so forth, just embracing the way that you grew up, and don't be ashamed of it. I mean, it's now you're living a different life, and life may be better or is better for most of us. But let's not forget that early part of life. Tell it, to the children. Let the children understand, like I tell my grandchildren about growing up on Edisto, and I love talking about those days, and talking to the children. Children would ask the darndest questions when I would go to the schools. Some of the children would ask this: "Well, did you all have toilet paper back then?" When you went to the outhouse, did you all have toilet paper? But these are nice. These are innocent children that want to ask questions, and you've got to just tell them the answer.
Right.
No, we didn't have toilet paper. Well, what did you all use? And the teachers are wanting to, they're squirming, saying,
Right.
don't ask that question. But I'm like, it's perfectly all right.
Yes.
See those things hanging from the trees that looks like they're called moss, but they look like ghosts at night. That was toilet paper. That was a form of toilet paper back in those days. And they just was like, whoa. It's like there are bugs in there, but it's just the innocence of children. But you really, it's just embracing it, sharing it, telling about it. Because if our generation don't tell about it, our generation was the last generation that really had that direct contact with those Gullah Geechee people, and the direct contact of growing up with, the outhouses and growing up the way that we did. So we don't tell them about it. Nobody's going to know about that part of our history at all, and some little kid, children would say sometimes, well, my grandmother has an outhouse now. So it's and it's fascinated that at this day and time, depending on where you go, because sometimes I travel quite a distance, because those students don't have the opportunity to get to museums and so forth.
Right.
And there are country places. And when they say that, then I realize that, there may still be a few people that have outhouses, depending on what part of the state that you're in.
Right.
And one wouldn't think that, because they would say, oh, no, nobody has an outhouse today. And I mean, I was a little taken back myself, like, oh my, someone still have an outhouse today? But they are still one or two, that still have that today.
Yeah, so sad. And let me get back to the book, Miss Theresa.
Mm-hmm.
What recipe describes you?
Oh my goodness. I believe it would be that good old collard greens. Oh my goodness. I tell you, we had that almost every Sunday. And that's something that I absolutely love.
Yes.
I love some collard greens.
Yes.
I don't fix it the way that I did back. Back in the days, we cooked it all day long. You put that meat in it, the ham hock and the pig's tail and all that stuff, and you put it in that big pot, and it's on that stove all day long. Mm. Nowadays, you practically saute that in the frying pan, and
that's right.
So, you cook it quicker today than you did, but every now and then, I go back to the old way of doing it and put a pot on that morning and let it cook all day.
Yes, yes.
Not often, but every now and then.
Well, that's amazing. And Miss Theresa, how can we actually purchase your book?
Well, you can go to my website at mamadoonk.com. That's MAMADOONK.com. mamadoonk.com. And you can also get it from Amazon and other places where books are sold.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to go purchase one myself soon. Well, Miss Theresa Hilliard, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I had a ball chatting with you, and I will be calling you about those plums.
Oh, yes, I can't wait because it'll be here in the next 6 months or so. for those
Oh
plums.
my goodness. Well, I'm
That's right.
marking that on my calendar right now.
Okay, yes, ma'am. And they should be here in April.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.